Ladies and gentlemen, Allie Miller.
All right, so I am going to talk to you all about food as medicine, using keto as the first layer of your wellness process, and then how we can kind of take things 2.0. This way? This way. Okay, better? A little less reverb. Okay, so, got a little bit more. All right, lock. Doesn't do so well with my inner lion that likes to pace when I talk, but anyway. So we're going to talk about layering on top of your already rocking ketosis foundation, how you can bring food as medicine into the equation, and even more so, functional integrative medicine. So let me see if I can advance with this guy. Brian, does this, oh, boop, boop, now I went 2. Can we go back? Am I supposed to? Okay. So I really like this visual of an iceberg. With functional integrative medicine, I like to say that we treat the root cause of chronic conditions. And so when we're looking at disease, you can see that's what's above the surface, right? So things like diabetes, cancer, looking at conditions like arthritis, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease, obesity, heart disease. These are all the things that are 20% over the surface. Well, the root cause is what's underlying mechanisms, right? So underlying mechanisms of these chronic conditions can be inflammatory imbalances. We can see imbalance with our microbiome or our gut biosis, which we've spoken to a couple times with a couple lecturers today. We can see imbalance with our HPA stress access and the adrenals in the body and our sexual hormone expression. We can see imbalance in our mitochondria, or the energy factory cells in every cell of our body. And then we can see toxic overload as a primary concern. So I want to start with stress and metabolism. I think that it's been discussed a couple times today about the role of cortisol. As a functional practitioner, I use something called the HPA Access. And so HP stands for hypothalamus pituitary, and the A stands for adrenal glands. And so 2 of these glands are in the brain and 1 sitting above the kidneys. Well, 2 sitting above each kidney. And so when we look at chronic stress, stress can be perceived as a mental stressor, so it can be a stress at work, it can be an interpersonal relationship, it can be stress just real lifing, right, momhood or whatever it is. It can also be good stress, like planning for a wedding. And mind you, beyond the mental drivers of stress, we can have physiological stressors. So for my women that are working in the cosmetic field and we're getting exposed to toxins with our hair, skin, and nail products, that's a stress to our system. For people that have parasite or dysbiosis or bacterial overgrowth, that's a stress to our system, right? So things can be externally entering our body as a stress, or it can be a mental drive. But either way, this HPA axis can show elements of dysfunction. So we can see from the hypothalamus issues with circadian rhythm. This would be starting to see symptoms of sleep intolerance, insomnia, body temperature changes. So if people call you the human heater, or you're cold and clammy, this is starting to see some hypothalamic dysfunction. Satiety regulation occurs in that part of the brain, and then the thyroid releasing hormone is manufactured actually by the hypothalamus. The pituitary, which is really more of the star of my show, if you will, has a huge role in our sexual hormone expression. So we're either in fight or flight, or we're in rest and digest, and in rest and digest is also reproduce. So in this rest and digest mode, we manufacture more of our sexual hormones. In the fight or flight, we're going to make more of those androgenic hormones, the DHEA, cortisol, stress responders. The pituitary regulates things beyond your fight or flight mechanism of the hormones, stress, or sexual. It also regulates things like our fluid regulation. Our antidiuretic hormone is made in the pituitary. We have a big influence with oxytocin. That reward-seeking bliss factor is driven by the pituitary. And then the pituitary is what directly stimulates either the ovaries and testes or the adrenals. In the adrenal side of things, the adrenals have a cortex and medulla, and in the medulla we make all the fun feel-good neurotransmitters like our dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, our adrenaline that some of us are running on. And then in the cortex is where we make those steroid hormones, the DHEA and cortisol. And those are the ones that have a bigger influence on our inflammation and our immune system's response. So regardless, it's been noted, I think a couple times, that if this HPA access is off and our cortisol is on high, that does play a huge influence with our insulin response and also drives the body to create more gluconeogenesis. So even if we've starved the body of glycogen from the liver and muscles, there is going to be that blood sugar survival response that the body will go into when we're in this chronic fight or flight. And that can interfere with our weight loss success or our ketogenic success in general. So a couple tools for this. I'm a really big fan of what can we do, right? And so if you've stopped by my table, I have a bunch of different laminates of labs that I run and different solutions to some of these problems. When we're talking about the HPA access, adaptogens are your first line of defense. So these are herbal compounds that help you to adapt to high stress without going deep into that adrenal gland to drive an overload of those hormonal output. So adaptogens are things like ashwagandha, holy basil or tulsi, urethro, maca, ginseng. All of these things, rhodiola, provide energy and stress response resilience. So we don't get into that chronic fatigue. We also don't get that excessive cortisol. So this is good for someone who's stressed and wired or stressed and tired. The nervines are good for the people that are stressed and wired. So nervines are more calmative, relaxing. This is things like valerian, skullcap, chamomile, oat pod. Vitamin C is going to be a nutrient we really want to focus on optimizing for our stress response. The highest source of vitamin C storage is in those adrenal glands, and it is required in the production and rebound of cortisol management. So getting ample vitamin C in the diet, especially in light of removal of course, a lot of the carbohydrate-rich sources, we're looking at getting our ample leafy greens. Bell peppers are a great source of vitamin C, and you can use moderate amounts of citrus, of course, in your water and such in your cooking and as an alternate to vinegar. And then probiotics are big too. So those first three are featured in a compound called Calm and Clear that I'm a big fan of. It has these nervines, these adaptogens, vitamin C, and then L-theanine, which helps to modulate the brain chemistry. L-theanine is like a blanket for your neurotransmitters. It's what's seen in matcha. So matcha's been very trendy. You can do, instead of bulletproof coffee, bulletproof matcha in the morning, 2 teaspoons of matcha green tea powder with your coconut oil or MCT oil and ghee. Blend that up with a little bit of ginger and you'll have a really nice zing to start the day. L-theanine is a blanket to your neurohormones, which helps to drive your alpha waves, which are seen in concentration, focus, and meditation. I use L-theanine in a supplement form to get children and adults off of Vyvanse and Adderall, different ADD type medications, and it allows concentration and focus without agitation and anxiety. So a really unique compound there. Best food source being matcha. Probiotics are key for stress response. And probiotics are important because 80 to 90% of our serotonin is manufactured along the GI tract. And so probiotics are nature's Prozac. As much as you can incorporate probiotic-rich foods into your diet, that's going to help with your neurotransmitter response, which in turn helps with your stress access management. And then fats, of course, are important, as is lifestyle elements, mantras, mindfulness, surrendering to the flow, if you will. And I like to use 4-7-8 breath, which is in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. That's Dr. Andrew Weil's approach to harness the wild stallion of the brain. And there actually is a big nerve that goes from our brain stem to our colon, the vagus nerve. And this is what really drives that parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system response in the body. By practicing that 4-7-8 breath, 5 to 8 cycles of that actually can shift the light switch from fight or flight into rest and digest. And that's super important because even if you're eating a kale salad with salmon as your lunch, if you're under high stress, you're not making as many digestive enzymes, so you're not going to be breaking down the food particles, which means you might get bloating after the meal or feel fatigued after the meal. You also, beyond not making enzymes, are not going to then absorb the nutritional compounds in your meal, so even the healthiest food won't be nourishing to you if you're under a state of distress during your mealtime. And how many of us crunch on that salad or whatnot as we're multitasking on our laptop or driving in a car, mind you, with a bar or something. So being mindful and relaxed state during your digestion is really important to optimize your nutritional status. This is an adrenal rehab shake I have on my blog. I have so many slides that just check it out, okay? It has a lot of therapeutic compounds. I'll highlight a couple of them, turmeric being a big one. Turmeric turmeric is one that is one of the granddaddy food as medicine approaches for antioxidant capacity. It also stimulates the liver, so helps with reducing risk factor for non-alcoholic fatty liver, also helps with liver enzymes, upregulates detoxification, and has a big favorable influence on our brain and neurohormones, and just anti-inflammatory approach across the board. So I want to transition from the stress axis, which is one of the kind of rocks I pick up with clients, and if need be, we run labs looking at their neurotransmitters, their cortisol and DHEA. But another piece of the puzzle is our micronutrient status, right? So beyond what we're not eating, which is the first step of getting successful in our ketogenic diet, right? We're removing. Now we have to think of what are we consuming, and is it vibrant, is it dynamic, is it nourishing? And I look at micronutritional deficiencies as a primary concern, especially if we're seeing rapid weight loss. So there's many reasons why we could be deficient. One might be inability to absorb. So maybe there's something going on with the GI tract. Maybe we are having inability to use. So this could be something with those genetic tests, like a SNP. So we're not able to manufacture or excrete a compound. That would be an inability to use. We might have a medication that's blocking the utilization or absorption. So medication interaction. And then another one would be increased demand. So increased demand is something to consider if we're carrying a child, if we're recovering from injury, if we're recovering from chemotherapy or radiation. Also, if we're running marathons and exercising, or if our body has lost and metabolized a significant amount of weight, right? So this is an example of a micronutrient wheel where a symptom is in the middle, and all of these different nutritional compounds can drive expression of that condition. So I work this in upstream medicine with my patients, and I will take an assessment of them, run their micronutrients, and then say, okay, so it sounds like your anxiety, your insomnia, your increased hemoglobin A1C, your insulin-resistant trends, your hair thinning, and your fatigue are all tying back to these trends of maybe biotin or zinc. And so by repleting this nutritional compound, we can get resolution of a multitude of different factors going on in your body. So I spoke through these. I think I hit them all. Increased demand, inability to absorb. Also be mindful, inability to absorb could be if we have had our gallbladder removed. Bile is a huge piece of the puzzle in tolerance of a higher fat diet. So looking at a digestive enzyme formula that has ox bile and lipase is really helpful for absorption and getting regularity in the bowels and less distress to the system, and better absorption of the fat-soluble compounds like our vitamin D, A, E, K, and overall oleic acid. Also using apple cider vinegar in the morning or lemon juice can be a good stimulant to throw that bile out from the liver to help with that emulsification and absorption. All right. So needs for keto specifically, micronutritionally speaking. B vitamins. You always want to make sure your B vitamins are methylated. And so methylation is what we've spoken to a couple lecturers on, these genetic SNPs. Methylation is a process of building or excreting. When you're looking at B12 and folate, you want to see the word methyl before it. So it should say methyl tetrahydrofolate versus folic acid. And it should say methylcobalamin versus cyanocobalamin, which can actually be metabolized into toxic cyanide if taken at high dose and not metabolized out of your body. Carnitine, super essential. This plays a role with our energy factories in our body, our mitochondria, and the carnitine shuttle synthase is what actually drives your body's fat into fuel. So beyond the production of ketone bodies, carnitine is used to use fat as a builder for ATP or energy production in the body. Minerals, calcium, magnesium, chromium, and zinc are big players to be mindful of, as well as, of course, electrolyte stability, especially going into ketosis and preventing keto flu. Fat-soluble vitamins, as I've mentioned, and then antioxidants. So glutathione is the granddaddy antioxidant. Cysteine is a building block to this compound. And then this whole family, this is going to help with free radical overload and oxidative stress in your body. And then amino acids we're typically getting from our proteins. I want to speak to toxicity and detox, because this is a big piece of the puzzle as well. So when we're talking about doing a cleanse or a detox, there's many different perspectives, and that word is unfortunately washed around, I think, inaccurately often. There are two biochemical processes of a detox. So one is phase one, which is actually the release of the stagnation of toxins in your body's fat stores. You have to actually upregulate the release of toxins to start a detox. Going into a fasting mode or calorie restriction is going to upregulate that autophagy, the ability of your cells to regenerate and actually recycle the good parts, get rid of the old part, which is a great step. But you also need therapeutic nutrients to actually therapeutically detoxify your body and support the liver and kidneys. So we're actually looking at things like milk thistle seed, particular B vitamins, and compounds that stimulate that liver bile flow. Phase two of your detox is actually more important than phase one. Phase two is where we get encapsulation and excretion of those toxins that were upregulated and released. So we've seen in research with cancer, people that have elevated phase one enzyme activity with inadequate phase two activity tend to have more free radical overload in their body and higher trends and correlation to cancer, because they're actually breaking down and releasing the toxins, but not encapsulating and excreting those toxins. So important things to consider. And in our diet, we are overfed yet malnourished. We are typically taking in too many calories with an inadequate micronutritional status, right? Dead foods, processed foods, foods that leach minerals and vitamins out of our body versus provide. And so we know that the diet can be a double-edged sword. It can be a piece of the solution or a piece of the problem, right? And toxic chemicals are something we want to watch even when pulling carbs out and becoming keto adapted. Be mindful that just because it's a food product does not mean it's safe. In fact, we use a phrase called GRAS, which means generally recognized as safe, and that's really disturbing to me. Generally recognized as safe. Only a third of the amount of chemicals in our food system have actually been tested, and many of them are tested by the companies that make monetization or profit from getting that chemical compound out into the food industry, deeming it as safe. So if they do 10 research studies and one showed safe outcomes, 9 others showed harmful outcomes, they're only going to present that one, right? So be mindful of that. Eating whole foods is important, and the replacement is just as important as the removal. So by that, removing bread, great. What are we having in its place? Are we getting spiralized zucchini? Are we getting our leafy greens? Are we getting the mineral-rich compounds? So food is medicine for detox, cruciferous compounds, I3C compounds, glutathione, your onion family, so the sulfur-containing compounds, all big drivers in that encapsulation and excretion. DIM is something I've spoke to a lot of you about. This helps with excreting excess estrogen from our body fat. And when we're upregulating our breakdown of fat as fuel with ketosis, we're getting a lot more estrogenic properties in the body. So diindol methionine, or DIM, helps to detox that estrogen from the liver and the colon. Then there's also supplementation support like Ultimate Detox with those sulfur-containing compounds to consider. So clean eating really goes back to eating real food. Is this my down 10 or my? I'm good. Okay, good. I'm like, I got a lot more. Okay. So clean eating really comes back to eating real food. Okay, so within your calorie limitation, within your foods you've already removed, where can you now, as a 2.0 level of this journey, start to upregulate and optimize, right? So we talked about, yesterday I mentioned this concept of the epigenome and putting yourself back in the driver's seat of the vehicle of your body, right? Rather than being dragged by the bumper of the vehicle of your body. And so we're probably feeling good today, but we're here because we want more. We want to feel better. We've gotten a taste from crappy to mediocrity or excellence, and how can we take it to that next level? And it comes with eating nourishing, whole, real foods. So we do see beneficial compounds in our plants, phytonutrients or plant-based antioxidants, but we actually see more bioavailable nutrients in animal forms because the animals do the work for us. So using a quality cod liver oil, for example, you're going to get the EPA and DHA components of omega-3s versus the omega-3s that will be talked about in your flaxseed or chia seed. Those omega-3s are in an ALA form, and it actually takes 16 and 18 different conversions in your liver to kidneys, back and forth to make that active EPA DHA, which is the anti-inflammatory and cognitive supporting compounds. So allowing the biological products to do the work for us. Consumption of liver, I have an awesome pate recipe on my blog. I have liver pills also using frozen raw liver that you can just take if you're not going to consume it as a food. But liver is going to be a great source as a superfood for a lot of these nutrients like choline, which has a huge role in cognition, memory, B vitamins, and again, those omega-3s in the highest potent anti-inflammatory form from the animal products. Also want to speak to for a moment organic versus non-organic and conventional. So as much as you can, we've talked about the Environmental Workers Group Dirty Dozen list and the Clean 15. And so when we're looking at that, we're wanting to manage organic where there's higher toxicity rates. And to consume organic does increase your vitamin C, does increase other phytocompounds like quercetin, which can help with histamine reactivity for both food sensitivity as well as upper respiratory distress. You're also going to see higher amounts of kaempferol. All of these just being tipped at the tip of the tongue of research on how these antioxidants work in the body. So maximizing your antioxidants will be seen with doing a variety of preparation forms, cooking, roasting, sauteing, massaging raw. Adding acids and fat to everything you consume is going to increase the absorption of minerals and antioxidants. And I want to speak to a little bit on a couple success stories, and then I'll take some Q&A. So this is a client of mine, Lori. She was a colon cancer survivor. And so when she came to me, she had a part of her colon removed during her procedure. When they identified the cancer, they removed a part of her colon. She also did chemotherapy and radiation. She was put on a low residue diet, which means high carbohydrate diet. And so she was put on white bread. She was put on soft starches. Her blood sugar was out of control, and she was having a lot of symptoms. She was having severe neuropathy. She was having anxiety. She was having leg cramps that were so bad because remember, your colon regulates your electrolytes, right? So she was having leg cramps that were so severe that she was waking up in the middle of the night just pounding her leg with Charlie horses. She was having 12 to 15 bowel movements a day with loose, urgent stools. And she was fearful to eat anything nourishing. She was fearful to eat raw vegetables. She was even fearful to eat proteins because they were too harsh on her system. So we started her off with an elimination diet. I did use an MRT blood test for her, which looks at 150 different foods and chemicals. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And so we used that like a GPS of Lori's body to determine for her what were her anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory foods. And believe it or not, lettuce was a red on her panel. So it made sense that she should not be eating those raw compounds. And it wasn't just the structure and the mechanical, it was actually lettuce was having an inflammatory immunological response in her system, driving inflammation. So when her body got lettuce into the bloodstream, she had an osmotic response of bowel urgency. The body immune system threw water and out it went, right? We also started her on a ketogenic diet. And with that, I started her on digestive enzymes, one with lipase and bile to help to support the fat absorption and utilization. I did the micronutrient test on her because of her neuropathy and the severe cramping and the anxiety and insomnia that was going on. We started her on alpha lipoic acid, which is an antioxidant that coats your nervous system, so it coats your myelin sheath. Good news for all of us is that ALA, alpha lipoic acid, is very high in red meat. And so eating grass-fed beef 3 to 4 times a week can be a great supporter of that compound. We started her on a sublingual B12 so that she could absorb the B12 directly under her tongue and not have to absorb it in the colon, right? And that helped a lot with the neuropathy symptoms as well. An overall B complex with methylated Bs, and then a form of, Maria alluded to, magnesium. Megglycinate is the form of magnesium you'd really want for neuromuscular relaxation and support. So I started her on a product called Relax and Regulate. It has magglycinate, which helps again with neuromuscular, so that stress we hold in the shoulders as well as we hold cold in our GI tract. So this does not cause an osmotic stool softening effect. It actually helps with the relaxation in the peristalsis or the pumping of our digestive system. So that it actually allows for motility in that sense. And then it's the more bioavailable for our nervous system. Inositol was also in that formula, which can help with anxiety and insomnia. That's why the formula is called Relax and Regulate, because it's both relaxing and regulating. Inositol also has been shown in research to help with PCOS and lowering excessive testosterone and DHEA in women that are androgenic. We started her on a probiotic as well because after having the removal, this is an image as I'm speaking of the MRT test and kind of what it looks like. We started her on a probiotic supplement as well so that we could re-inoculate her good gut microbiome to help to create balance and reduce the inflammation in her body and also help with that regularity and support her immune system again after all of the distress it was from with the chemo and radiation. So awesome results. We saw weight loss of 35 pounds. Her regularity went to 2 well-formed movements a day. She saw an improvement in energy, resolved neuropathy and leg cramping, electrolyte repletion, and improved sleeping and quality of life. One of the pulled quotes I'll say is, I feel better than I've felt in a decade. So that's Lori's story. I think I had a couple, but I nailed it down to 1. And this is my last 5. Okay, I'll give you 2 more slides and I'll take a Q&A, so if y'all have any questions. So I just want to speak a little bit further to probiotics and the concept of dysbiosis or bacterial imbalance, because I think that's kind of been buzzed and we've heard about it in some way, shape, or form. So probiotics truly translate to for life. The World Health Organization deemed probiotics the first line of defense as we're seeing this rise of antibiotic resistance. So in the idea of standard medical care, something's wrong, remove it, right? Well, we're trying to understand how to work with the body as a functional approach. So there's imbalance. How can we address the imbalance and rebound versus just kind of band-aid the system? And so when we're working with probiotics, we're actually trying to adjust the chemistry of the biome, the microbiome in the body, the living compounds. So 3 to 5 pounds of us today, each of us, is of bacterial matter, right? And when we add good bacteria to the tank, we want to be slow and steady. When we're looking at supplement forms, I generally recommend a 50-50 blend of lacto and bifido strains without the whole gamut of these multi-strain, 10-strain, what have you. Getting the targeted to most well-researched compounds is a good place to start. And then slow and steady, meaning if you're starting with 15 billion cultures, you might work your way up to 60 billion. And be mindful of if you have intolerance. There's only an upper limit of ability for bacteria to set up camp. So if you add a good army and there's already an established bad army in your system, you may get a battle, and that's an indication that you probably need to plow the fields or do some form of a candida or bacterial cleanse before you can actually get utilization of those probiotic strains. Otherwise, you're just creating that battlefield effect. Food forms of probiotics are going to be our miso, our pickles, our krauts, kimchi, yogurt, whey fermentation, which you can take the liquid of your yogurt and pour that into things like salsas and actually have probiotic-rich salsa. Raw cheeses and fermented cod liver oil are all great forms of probiotic foods. And again, probiotic is nature's Prozac. A cup of culture a day is really what we're looking at to really keep the doctor away, right? Versus that apple. So beating the bloat, if you're noticing intolerance to bacteria, I use a kind of 3R approach with treating the gut. And I think Dr. Cole touched on this as well. So we look at removing the irritant. So like with Lori's irritant was foods and chemicals. So we did a blood test to remove her from consuming those compounds. Remember the lettuce, right? So we might look at removing the irritant as something that we're consuming, or removing the irritant could be something biological, something that has set up camp in your system that we need to eradicate and kill off and remove. So we might use things like oregano and aromatic oils to upregulate apoptosis. We might use berberine to stimulate the bile flow and be antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal. We want to restore optimal function once we've removed the irritant. This could be with use of enzymes and probiotics. And then we want to rebuild the gut lining. So once we've used that GPS panel of the MRT test to identify what is your reactivity, we want to seal the tank. bone broth, collagen, gelatin. These are all excellent food as medicine fuel sources to line the villi of the gut and heal that leaky gut. And then considering glutamine as a supplemental form to help to line the GI tract. We want to starve off, of course, the bacteria. So if people aren't willing to go keto, a minimum of 60 grams of carbs. But if you're already in keto, beautiful. Stay at your 30 or less, and you're going to have less fuel to feed the bacteria because bacteria love sugar. And then we remove any forms of vinegar and fermented foods in the beginning of the cleanse because we want to be able to kind of starve off versus be feeding as we're going through the process. So just some resources for you. I have a cookbook back there. We work here, for example, we're working in the I3C, the indole 3 carbanols in the broccoli and kale base of this broccoli Dijon chicken. Note that it's bone in, skin on, right? We want higher fat cuts. We want a balance of dark meat with our light meat that actually balances out our amino acid distribution in our body. Super important to get the dark, rich collagen, tendon type stuff in our diet. Pesto turkey meatballs, your lycopene and carotenoids are going to be much more richly absorbed if you can cook them in a cast iron. Cast iron and iron absorption is enhanced by vitamin C as well, so it's a good synergy that you're getting of absorption of minerals and antioxidants and nutrients. My cauliflower chowder is just a nice option for comfort food. Again, getting those I3C compounds from your cruciferous and detoxifying compounds from the onions. Broccoli cheddar frittata. And this is just resources for you. So I have my cookbook. I have a virtual practice where we can come to my table and we can talk about any questions you have, access to labs, and then check out, I have a podcast, Naturally Nourished, and I'm available on Instagram and all that stuff as Allie Miller, at Allie Miller RD. So follow along and participate in the journey. Thanks.